Well, good evening on this beautiful fall day. It is my pleasure as the president of Monmouth College to welcome you to tonight's event. We're so glad you're here. Today, we are going to celebrate together the 8th annual Robeson Lecture. Special events like this bring together our community, our Warren County, our Monmouth community, with our learning community here on campus. And so we're so grateful to have people from the ag industry, from town, our students together to learn about agriculture. Tonight's speakers, as well as those over the past 7 years, provide lots of exposure on ag topics, right? Not only from that we'll learn area farmers will learn, but we'll challenge our students to think critically about the farm industry and the impact on our country. The person responsible for making this lecture possible is Monmouth College alumni Jean Robeson, the class of 1960. The lecture was founded in 2016 through a generous gift from Jean, which enabled us to bring notable speakers like tonight's speaker from the ag community to our campus to discuss issues, to discuss challenges and innovations in the field. Jean was born and raised in Warren County, where she has deep roots in the farming culture and farming community and takes great pride in being a leader in her family's farming operations. We are incredibly grateful for her loyalty to the college in establishing this lecture series. I want you to please join me in thanking Jean and ask Jean to rise so we can recognize her. And if you forget her face, it's right here in the program for you to bring home as well. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce a member of the committee that chose tonight's speaker, Mr. Ken McMillan. I am also proud to call Ken my friend, as well as a very loyal Monmouth College former faculty member, friend, and so much more to the college. Ken was born in Macomb, Illinois, just down the road, and grew up in a farm in McDowell County. He graduated from Bushnell Prairie City High School and went on to earn his bachelor's degree in agriculture and his master's degree in agriculture and economics from the University of Illinois. His professional career included working as a chief speechwriter on ag topics for the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, as well as serving as the Illinois State Senator. He also worked for the Farm Bureau. But then we got really lucky, right? And he came to Monmouth as a member of this campus community and served 25 years as a professor of finance and economics, retiring in 2019, but still very much part of this community. So since the inception of the lecture series, Ken has been an integral part and partner with Jean in selection of prominent speakers for all of us to hear. And so it is very fitting that we bring Ken up to the mic to introduce today's speaker that he had a major part in selecting. Ken?
Well, I've known Jean Robeson for nearly 50 years. And from day one, it was clear that her roots were deep in the black farm soil of Warren County. Jean was and is a farmer. And her devotion to that farmland from both sides of her family, and her determination that that farmland will be a legacy for her family, have been part of the impetus for this lecture series. Yet there's more to it than that. Jean's a proud graduate of Monmouth, as Pat just mentioned, and one of the things we take great pride in at Monmouth College is we seek to produce students who are critical thinkers. And in Jean Robeson, Monmouth succeeded in spades. I've been in many discussions with Jean over the years, and Jean never fails to ask the most pertinent questions and seek the most substantive understanding of the issues that are involved. And her critical thinking brought her attention to our speaker, who is Charlie Arnot, the CEO of the Center for Food Integrity. Now, Charlie and his organization are dedicated to building consumer trust and confidence in the food system. But just as, for instance, the Federal Reserve System and too many public officials ignored or downplayed widespread warnings 5 years ago that over-aggressive public economic policies were likely to trigger inflation, we are now paying the painful price for ignoring that. And today, public and private individuals and organizations have been raising concerns rather loudly about the impact of the practices employed throughout farming and agriculture to increase production so that we can feed the country and the world. Gene Robeson's critical thinking doesn't want farming and agriculture to be caught ignoring or dismissing those concerns. Gene Robeson is a leader who believes in exploring and listening to the voices of those concerns. And enter Charlie Arnot, a Lincoln, Nebraska area native who was awarded the 2024 Alumni Master designation by his alma mater, the College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Nebraska. So to speak to us on the subject, from the green revolution to factory farming, on behalf of Gene Robeson, I present to you the CEO of the Center for Food Integrity, Charlie Arnot.
Thank you, Ken. That was a very nice introduction. I want to thank Gene. I want to thank President Draves and everybody here. It's been an absolutely fabulous day on the campus. I've so enjoyed my trip here, the opportunity to meet so many wonderful students and incredible faculty on this beautiful campus. And thank you for the weather. Really, I couldn't have asked for anything better. So I really appreciate you worrying after my visit. But in all seriousness, this has been an amazing day, and I'm humbled and grateful to be here with you tonight. I look forward to the conversation we're going to have. I'm going to share with you my thoughts and my perspective, and then I look forward to your questions and your feedback as we continue to go through the evening. To see a little bit more about me here, I'm a proud grandpa. If you have 3 extra hours after we're done this evening, I'll be happy to show you pictures of Theo. He's 4, and he's pretty darn impressive if you just ask me. I am a University of Nebraska graduate where the N on the helmet stands for knowledge. So I hope you don't hold that against you. The N on the helmet stands for knowledge. And if I come back here in, let's say 3,026 years, I'll tell you a dad joke. Maybe good, maybe bad, who knows? It'll be 50-50, right? So it'll be hard to tell whether or not it's a good or bad dad joke at that point in time. So we're going to plow forward with the content. Why do we exist? At the Center for Food Integrity, we exist to help organizations build consumer trust. Why trust? We believe trust is every organization's most valuable and tangible asset. And we tend not to think of it that way. We tend to think of it as something that just kind of happens. We either have it or we don't. But we don't think of it as an asset that we have to care for, and that we have to invest in, and that we realize the value of. And tonight we're going to talk about some of the value of trust, and then what happens when trust is dissipated, or we lose trust, and then more importantly, collectively, what can we do to continue to earn trust in food and agriculture? Because at the end of the day, when we lack that level of trust, we see higher costs, we see more restriction, we lose that public acceptance of what we do, and it becomes more difficult to do what we do on an ongoing basis. So we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about that, and I'll welcome your questions as we continue to move forward. There we go. Okay, so our members, I'll move back one. You can see the variety of organizations that are members of the Center for Food Integrity, and it's an eclectic group by design. So we have companies, we have associations, we have academics, we have global organizations, we have state trade associations, We have checkoff organizations, accounting firms, runs the gamut. Because we really want that 360-degree perspective. It really informs our strategy and our work, and they learn from each other, right? Because the perspective of a farm organization is going to be very different than the perspective of a retailer. So when we find ourselves talking about these issues, it's very helpful to have those organizations all at the table. We also have organizations that are not interested in being a member, but they're willing to work pre-competitively on a wide range of issues. So pick any issue in agriculture, we may have worked on it with one or more of these organizations as we think about ways to bring the food system together to work on building consumer trust. So I want to give you my agenda for tonight, kind of what we're going to cover. How did we get here? How did we find ourselves in the position that we're in today, where agriculture is not as trusted as it once was? That's irritating, right? It's something we're frustrated about. We don't quite understand what happened. We don't believe we have changed, and yet all of a sudden, there are all these questions about what we do. How did that happen? How did we get to this place? We'll talk about the challenge of a post-truth world. The way we communicate, the way we connect with people, the way information is shared is so different today than it ever was, and it's going to continue to change, and it's going to continue to change more rapidly. So how do we adapt to that, and how do we think about building trust in that environment? And then finally, a path forward. So I don't want to leave you without some specific ideas on what we can do, what each of us can do individually to build trust in agriculture as we continue to move forward. So U.S. ag policy fundamentally changed on December 7th of 1941. That was the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed. Prior to that, ag policy in the 1930s was actually designed to be more supportive of prices as a way to, more supportive of constraining supplies, as a way to support prices for farmers. But on December 7th of 1941, at that moment, food security became national security. And the call went out to farmers to increase productivity and do it now. It was a national imperative. It was the patriotic thing to do. And so farmers began to make that happen on an ongoing basis. So the cultural norm for farming became to produce more every year, to increase yield, to increase throughput. And so that became the measure of success for U.S. agriculture, because that was absolutely essential to our success and our survival as a country during World War II. Toward the end of the war, Norman Borlaug, who started to do some research in Mexico that was truly fascinating, became the birth of the Green Revolution. He was trying to figure out how to help Mexican wheat farmers. They were growing huge heads of grain, but the stocks could not support them. And so they would just continue to collapse in the field and be very difficult to harvest. So we began breeding that, taking some Japanese dwarf wheat and crossbreeding that with the wheat we found in Mexico, and all of a sudden, the Green Revolution was started. And it was so crucially important because population growth was outstripping yield growth, and in Pakistan and in India and other parts of the world, famine was imminent. And if you cannot feed your population, you will not have a stable society. Right? If people are hungry, your society will not be stable. And so being able to find ways to feed people was absolutely essential to maintaining global stability. So not only did Borlaug and the Green Revolution take a tremendous humanitarian step forward, geopolitically it was very important because they allowed those governments to remain stable. And for that, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1970 and credited with saving more than 1 billion lives. One person credited with saving more than 1 billion lives because of his work in agriculture. So again, you begin to see this phenomenal work that agriculture is doing, whether it was what was done in response to World War II, what's happening in the Green Revolution, and those in agriculture can take tremendous pride, and should take tremendous pride and great credit for the work that has been done. And you begin to see what was taking place there in terms of the yield beginning in 1944. Look at that trend line for corn from 1886 to 2022. Phenomenal, right? That's really, you won't see that kind of hockey stick growth line many times, and particularly not for commodities, right? To be able to get a group of people organized to employ the technology and capital and labor to make that happen during that period of time, nothing short of miraculous. And then you continue to see we can do that now without having to increase inputs. Total agricultural output continues to increase while farm inputs remain relatively steady. So we continue to produce more every year without having to increase our inputs on a significant basis. And then it's hard to see here, but when we continue to replace labor with technology, with greater mechanization, you can see labor inputs to agriculture also just plummeting, while agricultural output remains consistent or even increases. So the story of American agriculture is nothing short of miraculous. And it's a tribute to those in this room, your fathers, your grandfathers, and all those who've been involved since World War II and before to make this a reality. It's a wonderful thing that's happened. But what we've also seen, unfortunately, on an adjusted basis, is the prices for, on an inflation-adjusted basis, the prices for corn, wheat, and soybeans have continued to drop on an ongoing basis, almost year over year, with a few exceptions. World War II, the Korean War, the energy crisis, the Great Recession. But for the most part, the trend line is negative. Right? So what farmers are getting paid on a per bushel basis continues to decline. So if what you're getting per bushel continues to go down, and you want to maintain your standard of living, what's your option? Grow more bushels. Right? That's the only thing you can do, is to grow more bushels, to maintain that basic standard of living. And so we've seen that happen. But as we've seen that happen, we've seen the size of farms continue to grow while the number of farms continues to decline. Because you have to have larger farms and produce a larger volume if you're going to be profitable and maintain a standard of living for your family that allows you to contribute to your community and to send your kids to college and to do the things that all of us want to do and to be able to provide for our families. So Borlaug, in 1997, so this was already quite some time ago, said, look, we've got the technology to feed 10 million people, right? It's already in place, or at that time it was still in the pipeline. It's in place today, quite easily. The more pertinent question is whether farmers and ranchers will be permitted to use that technology. So we find ourselves in a situation where we've employed an enormous amount of technology to phenomenal social benefits, right? We answered the call to World War II. We staved off starvation around the world. We continue to do all of this, and yet we find ourselves in a situation where people are asking questions about who we are and what we do. Understandably creating some frustration, right? Because all of a sudden, we're no longer the cultural heroes that we have been. And people are raising different kinds of questions, and understandably, that creates some angst. So I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about the erosion of trust, and what has happened to trust, and what do we know about trust, and what causes trust. Because again, trust is not just every organization's most valuable intangible asset, it's every sector's most valuable intangible asset. So while they may trust farmers, they aren't sure they trust farming. Right? So they may like you individually, but they aren't sure they like what. Oh, there's another Nebraska shirt in the crowd. I like that. That's great. Go Big Red.
Go Big Red.
Go Big Red. Okay, we'll talk later. All right. So as we began this work, we wanted to understand what does it take to build trust, right? And we kind of think it's this, we kind of think it's that. Well, that's not going to cut it. We actually need some research to understand. So we partnered with Steve Sapp, the Department of Rural Sociology at Iowa State, and we began with a meta-analysis of 21 different pieces of research on trust in food or agriculture. And in each of those 21 pieces of research, we identified 3 common drivers. The first is the role of influential others. And that was, when we did this research, probably 2007, published in 2009, yes. We began it in 2007. At that time, influential others were credentialed individuals whose opinion you respected. Doctors, academics, others, because they had a credential, they knew what they were talking about, and therefore I would trust them. They are an influential other. The whole definition of influential others is very different today. Edelman Public Relations does a global survey every year, a trust barometer. And what they learned this year globally is someone like me is now as trusted as a scientist. Right? So I trust someone like me for information on technology and new innovation as much as I trust a scientist. So that's completely redefined the role of influential other and has to influence how we think about engaging going forward. Because if someone like me, someone on TikTok or on Facebook or on Instagram is now as influential as a scientist, that has real consequences for how we think about engaging going forward. The second element in building trust is competence. That's our facts and skills. Now, historically, that's where we've spent most of our time in agriculture. I served on a couple of different checkoff boards, state and national boards for the pork industry when I worked in the pork industry. Whenever we ran into a question about whether or not people believed us or trusted us, our first response was, well, we need to do more research. Because we were operating under the assumption that if we gave people the right data, if we gave them the right facts, clearly they'll be logical and they'll accept that data and they will come to our side of the argument. If they had to come to our side of the argument, it must mean we've not yet given the right facts. So let's go do some more research. And then let's go do some more research. And then we'll do some more research. Because we were convinced there was some kind of magical lock on Pandora's box of trust, that if we simply had the right facts, we could unlock it. And all of a sudden, people would trust us again. So we were really focused on trying to get that right magical box open. The third element in building trust is confidence, or the perception of shared values and ethics. Can I count on you to do what's right? So once we identified that those are the three elements that drive trust, then we've surveyed 6,000 consumers over 3 years, asking them a whole range of questions about agriculture and farming and food. And what we learned in that, if you look at the combination of competence and confidence, is that confidence, or shared values, is 3 to 5 times more important than data in building trust. Confidence or shared values is 3 to 5 times more important than science and data in building trust. We've had the historical equation exactly backward, because we've always led with the data. We've always led with the science, believing that people would, well, clearly they want to trust us. We're in agriculture. We're farmers. We just need to give them the information. Not how it works. They don't believe we share their values. If they don't understand that we care about what's important to them, none of the data we share with them is going to be persuasive. Not a minute. So we'll talk about how we can change that equation when we get to the close. The other thing that's really important is to understand the bias against size, right? We have a bias, and understandably so, against size in this country. There's a belief that has been justified by a series of anecdotal illustrations in banking and in food and a whole bunch of industries, where the belief is the bigger the company, the bigger the operation, the more likely they are to put profit ahead of public interest. So when it comes to food, people don't mind profit. They want us to be profitable. They want farmers to be profitable. They want others to be profitable. But they also want us to acknowledge we have a public interest obligation. That we have an obligation to produce safe food, protect the environment, and care for animals, treat workers fairly. If you have questions about that, we need to be willing to engage in those conversations and dialogue, because there's that inverse relationship between size and the perception of shared values. Again, documented this through consumer research. What's the percentage of people who strongly agree with the statement they're likely to put their interest ahead of consumer interest? For commercial farms, 50%, large food companies, 57%, national food companies, 54%. And we've done it with family farms, we've done it with large farms and small farms. Doesn't matter the descriptor that you use, it's all about the perception of size, right? Above a certain size, and you know, in farming, the big farm is the one who has 5 more acres than me, I get that. But from a public perspective, there's no concept of size. There's no concept of size. It just all looks and sounds big. So big farms, big food. And it's reinforced when you think about the 11 companies on the screen that own most of the brands we buy. You can't really see it on this particular screen. It's a bit of an eye chart. But those 11 companies own most of the food brands that we buy, and it doesn't even include Great Value. That's Walmart's home brand, which is the largest single food selling brand in the country. Right? So there's been tremendous consolidation, integration, and industrialization, which has made food more affordable, made it more affordable, available, and accessible than any place else on the planet. If you've traveled anywhere, people complain about the price of food here, it's only because they've not been somewhere else. Right? We have an amazingly affordable food system here today. But it also has been consolidated, integrated, and industrialized. So it's very, very different than the kind of vision that people have in their head about what a farm should look like, what a food company should look like, what their grocery store should look like, and yet they kind of want all of these things at once. So we'll talk about that consumer in just a bit. This is from our friends at FMI, the Trade Association for Retail Grocers, who currently chairs our board. And the historical model was primarily women in the shopping, and they had 3 questions, right? Is it convenient? Does it taste good? And can I afford it? Check, 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 sales made, right? That's not the way it works today. Men are equally as likely to shop as women, and they have a whole host of other concerns or questions that they are asking about food. It's no longer just price, taste, and convenience. It's all of these different attributes, depending on the consumer, that may resonate with them and may be a factor for driving purchase behavior. So it's not as easy as it used to be, and now we have omni-channel shopping, right? My wife took a fall earlier this year, so I do most of our shopping. It's not uncommon for me to shop 4 different grocery stores a week. because I like this here, I like that the other place, and of course I can always rely on Amazon to get it to me tomorrow. Right? So the whole environment for where we shop and how we shop and what's important to us as shoppers has fundamentally changed. Now, this is a gift of affluence. Absolutely. Right? It's a gift of affluence. But it's a gift that most of us enjoy. And those who are raising questions about agriculture and the food system generally enjoy the gift of affluence. So there's a correlation there between those who can afford all of this and those who talk about these kinds of issues. So again, thinking about math, and again, remember, I went to the University of Nebraska and on the Helmet for Knowledge. This used to be the equation. Dollars, is it easy? How does it taste? Not today. Much more complicated, and there's no way I could even think about doing this equation. Those of you who majored in math, I would encourage you to kind of figure out what that calculus looks like and tell us what's actually going to contribute and make a sale happen. So now we've kind of talked about what happened historically and what's happened in agriculture, what's happened in consumers. Now let's talk about what's happened in the world around us and how it's changed everything that we consume today in terms of information, how we receive it, where we receive it, how we interpret it, what we do with it, because today we truly are living in a post-truth world. Now, growing up, I can see some of you probably had the same experience. We had 3 television stations. Can you imagine? Only 3. NBC, ABC, and CBS, and every night, every station gave you roughly the same 22 minutes of news with a different anchor or a different reporter, but we kind of had the same cultural understanding of what was important. And media doesn't tell us what to think, but they tell us what to think about, because they make it visible to us, and they share it with us, and they keep it in the spotlight for us to consider. But because it was all the same, we all kind of had that shared cultural understanding. And horror of horrors, some of you also had to go through this, and you're probably suffering PTSD. You had to get off the couch to go physically change the channel. Right? I mean, hard to believe that we endured that, and we're still here today. But we did. We made it through that. But we've transitioned from mass communication to masses of communicators, right? Anybody with a cell phone or a computer or an iPad or anything that will connect you to the internet can now communicate with anybody else and create their own media channels, create their own distribution networks, create their own whatever. And there's no, I mean, when I went to the College of Journalism, you had to have 2 independent sources before you could publish a story. You could make it up today. You didn't have to have any sources. You can just say this is true, and you better believe it because I said it was. And people will, depending upon the source and how you go forward. But it's infinite in terms of the number of sources that people can source today. And if you think about the impact of technology, this has been fascinating and it's only going to move faster. Only 20 years ago, 2004, Facebook was founded. Just 20 years ago. And today, you think about the impact of all of these other channels, it's incredible. In 2022, 2 years ago, more than half the global population was already on social media. Half the global population. Right? Facebook this didn't happen all that long ago, and now more than half the people everywhere in the world are on social media. So it's amazing. And when you think about the speed again of the technology, going back to Facebook, it took 4 years and 6 months to get 100 million users. Threads, their alternative to Twitter, took 5 days to get 100 million users. Right? It happens just like that. Just like that. The speed at which all of this happens is phenomenal and very difficult to comprehend and impossible to manage. Some of you may be familiar with the World Economic Forum in Davos. They have their GRPS, their Global Risk Perception Survey that they do when they meet about 1,500 experts across a variety of fields and studies in the world. This came out in late 2023. Their number one concern from 2024 through 2025 was misinformation and disinformation. It wasn't war, it wasn't famine, it wasn't climate change, it was misinformation and disinformation. That was their number one concern for the next 2 years, and it's going to continue to be powered by AI. 74% of people across 29 countries think artificial intelligence is making it easier to generate very realistic fake news stories and images. I shared this story with some others earlier today, but the AI class at the University of Nebraska, they put together a presentation from the chief financial officer to share with the Board of Regents, telling the Board of Regents that they needed to sell the stadium to Iowa to cover a budget deficit. Right? It was not the chief financial officer, but the Board of Regents couldn't tell the difference. They could not tell the difference between what was created in AI and the actual chief financial officer. So it's going to be fascinating to see the deep fakes that we're faced with between now and election day. And clearly some of them will be attacks on one candidate or the other, but some of them will also be designed to suppress votes, right? Oh, there's a shooting at this polling place, don't go vote. That polling place is flooded, it's closed, don't get there. Oh my gosh, there's a horrible accident, we can't even think about it, right? So clearly there will be attacks on candidates, but there will also be attacks on the system. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens. And regulation always lags technology. So it will be years before this is ever regulated in a way that helps us get it under control. So again, you think about that change from mass communication to masses of communicators. When we had ABC, NBC, and CBS, they were shooting for the middle of the bell curve. We kind of know who that is, or we knew who that was at that point in time, so we're going to gear all of our messages and content to them. But we've changed now to this infinite proliferation of microcultures or tribes, where the bell curve does not exist anymore. Right? The rest of the world does not look much like what we see in this room. And so it's very, very different politically, ethnically, linguistically, you name it. So there's an infinite number of tribes, which makes it very interesting, but it also makes it very difficult. When the blue tribe doesn't agree with the brown tribe, doesn't agree with the green tribe, doesn't agree with the blue tribe, doesn't agree with the black tribe, and they all have their own values, their own culture, their own language, and they have decided what's going to be true to them. And everything now is about demonizing and polarizing and attacking the other, whoever the other happens to be. So the opportunity to have civil discourse around some of these challenging issues is diminished. But we have the opportunity to change that. And we're going to talk about that opportunity and how we can capitalize that at the end of today's presentation. The other thing we're seeing, this is a difficult chart, but these are all media outlets, right? These are all media outlets that are now chasing that bell curve and chasing that infinite number of tribes, because the historical model of selling ads to capture people in the middle of the bill no longer works. So you find media outlets that are catering to those who are on the far left. You find those who are catering to the far right, those who are more factual, those who are left factual, because they're all chasing clicks. Because they've got to get clicks and eyeballs in order to generate revenue to stay alive. So this just perpetuates that cycle of divisiveness and polarization that we've seen that is so incredibly destructive. And there are some pollsters, and those who do social science work, John Dick from Civic Science is one, who says that if you tell him which political tribe you lean toward, he can tell you what you're likely to do and how you're likely to behave on a whole range of other social issues, because they've all become identity politics. So my identity is tied to this group or that group, and so I'm going to follow this group or that group on this particular issue, as opposed to thinking about these issues individually, because it's inconsistent with others that I might want to be a part of. All right, this might be the most difficult concept in an academic institution, in the fact that truth is relative. Truth has always been a social construct, but we tend to think of truth as being driven by science, right? We tend to think of truth as being driven by empirical evidence. That's not always the case anymore. The research we've done shows that there's really a truth spectrum. From those on the left who think about it as objective and grounded in evidence-based science, nothing more, nothing less, and those on the right coincides with what my desire and what I believe feels true to me at this moment. So you've got this entire spectrum, and we'll talk about who's in those groups and how they influence others, and really what they're looking for when it comes to information about food and agriculture. This is a bit of an eye chart, my apologies for that. But it starts on the left with the scientific. Only 6% of the population, 11% share of voice. They drive standards about scientific claims, but they're unable to simplify the content and relate to mainstream consumers, so their influence only extends as far as the philosopher. The philosopher takes that evidence, simplifies it, shares it through an ethical lens, a values-based lens, which influences the follower who just want to make the right decision. 9% of the population, 14% share of voice. Now we're getting into critical mass, right? The follower, 39% of the population, but only 10% share of voice. They're not talking about it a great deal. They're overwhelmed by the sheer volume and complexity of information. They just fear doing the wrong thing. They're looking for somebody to give me an easy answer, right? Give me an easy button, tell me what's true, what I can believe. The wishful thinker, 30% of the population, but holy cow. Now you're looking at 40% share of voice. These are the folks that are great for clickbait. They trust big sweeping claims from unofficial and official sources. They exaggerate the impact of a particular food or practice, undermining your credibility, right? So drink a cup of vinegar and lose 30 pounds in a week. That's the kind of thing that they're going to be falling for because they're looking for those big sweeping claims from whoever happens to make them. And then the existentialists, 14% of the population, 25% share of voice. They feel morally superior. They prefer information that validates their existing beliefs about food and health. Too politically charged, which alienates them from mainstream culture. Now, when I talk to ag audience, they normally go, oh, well, that's the crunchy folks. It's also some of us in ag. Because we are so solid in our beliefs about what should or should not happen, that if anybody doesn't eat pork, beef, chicken, you name it, whatever it happens to be, 3 meals a day, there's something wrong with them. They are inferior as a person, and I am superior, and therefore I'm on the right track, they are wrong. So it doesn't help us build relationships and build trust if we are stuck as an existentialist. The people who are most successful in building trust are the philosophers. They take the scientific evidence, share it through an ethical or values-based lens, and it influences the follower, 39% of the population. So you've got almost half the population if you can influence the philosopher and the follower and make a difference in how you're going to drive trust across the food system. So as Twain said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Right? So it's what we believe to be true that absolutely isn't. That's what gets us into trouble. And there is so much of that today across all media, about food, about agriculture, about politics, whatever it happens to be. Okay, so no one's left yet. That's a good sign because I've done all the depressing stuff. Now we're going to go to what in the world can we do about it, right? So we've kind of covered all of that. Now we're going to go, what can we do to change that conversation? What can we do to be that force of change that actually influences the dialogue in a positive way that leads to a better perception of agriculture, that helps us make those relationships that build trust in who we are and what we do in agriculture today. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all want to be able to accomplish. So the path forward, 3 steps to values-based engagement. Okay, I'm not going to ask you to raise your, I'm not actually going to ask you to raise your right hand, but subconsciously you keep your hands in your lap. But I want you to promise to stop doing 3 things. Okay? We're going to tell you what 3 things we want you to do, but first, I want you to promise you're going to stop doing these 3 things, because these are crucial to eroding trust. First of all, stop trying to persuade. Right? You're not going to convince me. I don't care about how much data you share with me. I don't care if it's peer-reviewed or unpeer-reviewed. If I believe something else, if my values are inconsistent with your values, you're not going to convince me. In fact, all you're going to do is irritate me if you keep pounding on me after I told you I disagree with you. So stop trying to persuade me. Don't try to correct or educate me. Right? If this is what I believe, again, no amount of information is going to change what I believe. So don't keep pounding on me. Nobody wants to be educated while they're having a conversation about what they should or shouldn't eat, what they should or shouldn't believe. They certainly don't want to be corrected. Again, all you're going to do is galvanize their opposition if you decide you want to correct them. And finally, please don't try to win. Please do not try to win. You can win the argument and lose the opportunity to build trust with somebody who could have some influence over what's happening. Right? So this is not about persuading, it's not about correcting, it's not about winning. It's about building trust. So we need to change our mindset first and understand those actually work against us. If we try to make that happen, we're undermining our own success, which is not what we want to do. Right? We want people to trust us the way they should trust us and the way they used to trust us, even though the way we do what we do continues to evolve and change for very good reasons. So I'm going to share with you kind of the principles of our engaged training. This is based again on our peer-reviewed and published model. This has been converted, translated into 7 languages. We've done in North and South America, Europe, Asia, and where am I going? Thank you. And Australia. I was going to go Argentina, but I don't think we've done it in Argentina. We may have. I think it's Australia. Holy cats. Thank you for that. But it's based on those principles, and again, it's worked really well. Probably the best compliment I ever got from this was when I did it once in Geneva. And a young woman came up to me afterwards and goes, I finally know how to talk to my mother-in-law. Okay. That's success. If we help you figure out how to talk to your mother-in-law, we're on the right track, all right? So even if you don't think about this in terms of building trust in agriculture, you might be able to have a better relationship with your mother-in-law. Okay, so it starts by listening, and listening without judgment. That is so hard. Right? It's hard to listen without judgment because I remember from my court days, I knew all the answers. I could anticipate as soon as 3 words came out of somebody's mouth, I knew the question they were going to raise. I knew the misinformation they had, and I was going to correct them right there, boy. I had it. I knew the answers. I had the science. I was going to correct them, and I was going to alienate them. Right? I didn't know that at the time. So you have to listen without judgment because we have no idea what's below the water. Right? Everybody who comes to this conversation has a backstory we know nothing about. We don't know if they have kids with allergies. We don't know if they have somebody who's battling a diet-based disease. We don't know if they have a history of farming. We don't know anything about them other than the question or topic that they've raised. So unless we listen without judgment and engage them in dialogue, we're never going to understand what's below the surface and how we might be able to relate to them in a way that actually results in greater trust. So that starts with listening. Stephen Covey said most people do not listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. Count me guilty, right? Because somebody starts to speak, we're already formulating our response or our answer. We're not really listening to understand. And we're going to talk about how we can do that in a way to fundamentally change the conversation. So when you're listening, what I want you to listen for in a conversation is what values do you hear? Right? And I don't know how you farmers can use all those chemicals. It's just polluting the environment, and those GMOs, it's just terrible. Okay. So what I'm hearing is this person cares about the environment. That's cool. I care about the environment too. Maybe they care about food safety with the GMOs, but I don't know enough yet to draw that conclusion. But if they care about the environment, I might be able to connect with them on that because I care about the environment too, right? What topics do you hear? Where can you find agreement? Right? We're so conditioned today to find those places that divide us. Where is there a place where you can begin a conversation based on a mutual value, a shared value, or a shared interest? Then it's asking questions. You're asking to invite dialogue, clarify, build understanding, and show you care. People need to be heard, right? People need to be heard. They need to know that you heard them, not so that you can respond, so you can engage them in a meaningful conversation. Yes, and tell me more. I understand that is true for you. Right? I don't have to validate your misinformation, but I can embrace the conversation because I'm interested in what's interesting to you. Right? So it's the opportunity for me to engage in a very, very different way. So you acknowledge to demonstrate empathy and validate that you've heard them. That doesn't mean you agree with them. This place is hard because a lot of people are like, no. I can't agree with them. Not asking you to agree with them. Okay? If somebody says, hey, the earth is flat, I'm pretty well convinced the earth is flat, Galileo is wrong, everybody says Galileo is wrong, the moon landing was a hoax. Okay. Well, I appreciate that things around science and our earth are very important to you. Tell me more. Okay? I don't have to agree that the earth is flat, but I can understand that that's important to the person to whom I'm speaking and have a conversation with them. Ask questions that help you learn more about their perspective, right? That's what you're trying to do is you're peeling the onion. You're looking for ways to see, is there a place we can connect? Is there a shared value somewhere where we can connect and make a difference? I hadn't heard that before. What concerns you the most? I can understand why there's confusion. I can tell this topic is very important to you. Can you tell me more? That one's always a winner for me, right? Hey, it's clear this is really important to you. I respect that. I appreciate it. Can you tell me more? I haven't validated the misinformation, but what I'm telling the person to whom I'm speaking or with whom I'm speaking is that what they have to say is important to me and I would like to learn more. And then share some of your perspective, not everything you know. Again, this is not about facts and data. It's about making that values-based connection and then providing enough information to support the conversation. Science is essential, but it's not sufficient in building trust. You have to have a scientific foundation, but science in and of itself is not going to be what ends up building trust. So this is how it actually works when we do these half-day or full-day workshops. It's listen, ask, listen, ask, listen, ask. Then you are given permission to share. You don't even give people permission to share anything until they've listened and asked at least 3 times. That's really hard. You will be surprised how many people struggle with that in the training before they share. That I need to listen and ask, listen and ask, listen and ask 3 times to build that relationship, to demonstrate that I share the value, or someone who comes in with questions that can be kind of hostile. And they aren't sure that I'm going to take them seriously, but by God, they want me to know their perspective. Right? So this is an opportunity to build that relationship in a fundamentally different way. And there's sometimes it's just not going to work. Right? Sometimes you are just not going to be able to make a connection. And that's okay. Right? You don't have to build a relationship with everyone. So when you meet Grandma in the grocery store, you just say, hey, thank you so much. I appreciate your perspective. We're probably just going to have to agree to disagree and move on. But that's rare. It's very rare that you're not going to be able to find some place to make a connection of some kind. We're all human beings. We all have shared interests. So remember, shared values open the door to more meaningful conversations and build trust. And you can answer the hard questions. You really can. Embrace the skepticism. Skepticism is a gift. Apathy is a curse. So when people are skeptical, it means they have enough interest to stay engaged. Right? Much better than when people are apathetic because they've given up. We have no opportunity for people that have become apathetic. There's no opportunity to engage them because they've already thrown in the towel. So embrace skepticism. It's a wonderful thing. If somebody's skeptical, that's great. Engage in that conversation even though it might be hard. And understand that this is a process. It's not an event. Right? It is not an event. You're not going to be able to build trust. There's no easy button. You have to do it again and again and again and again. And commit to these principles over time if you want to be successful in building trust. And at the end of the day, trust is our most valuable and tangible asset. So you want to make sure you invest in it accordingly. And facts are a lot like salt, right? If you add the right amount, it's wonderful. It improves your dish, it increases flavor. But if you add too much, it's ruined. So treat facts like salt when you're cooking. A little goes a long way. So be judicious in the facts you choose to share and how you choose to share them after you establish that values-based connection. My last slide before we open up for questions. No one is better equipped to do this than everybody in this room. Right? You all know and understand agriculture, you know and understand science, you are incredibly well equipped to do this. But always, always, always remember that who you are is more important than what you know. Who you are is more important than what you know. Your ability to connect as a human, as a mom, as a dad, as a grandma, as a grandpa, as a student, as somebody interested in the environment or food or whatever it happens to be, is much more powerful than any information or expertise that you have to share. So leverage your strength. Your strength is your ability to connect with others based on that shared value, because that's the foundation for how you're going to build trust. You can catch the QR code, download all our resources. All our resources are available free on our website. We've got a conference coming up in Chicago, not too far away, at the end of October, all around transparency. And how can we make transparency actionable? How do we make transparency a strategy that you can deploy in whatever organization you happen to be in? Because transparency is really the currency of trust. And how do we find ways to become more transparent that don't involve reckless oversharing, that get us to a point where it truly is strategic and not a concern about reckless oversharing. So I'm going to leave that up so you can capture it, and at this point in time, I would welcome any questions, any comments, any criticisms. Just please don't throw right fruit. Thank you. Questions for anyone? From anyone? Yeah. Over here, on that side, of course. Here we go. Oh, I'm sorry, you're supposed to be moderating this.
So, as agriculture moves to build trust with the more affluent American citizens, what steps are being taken to make sure that they don't lose trust with the 40 million Americans that live below the poverty line, who only still care about cost and taste?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, food insecurity is and will continue to be a pressing challenge. the people who are challenged with food security are less likely to raise concerns about anything other than, can I afford to feed my family? But when you think about the value of trust, so when we have trust, we have greater social license, we're given permission to do what we do. When we lose it, there's more control for how we raise animals, the kinds of products, the chemicals we use, everything we use. That's not going to come from that 40 million Americans. So the focus is, as distasteful as it might be, needs to be on those who influence the outcome. And those are going to continue to be those groups. Now, to that end, it can't be a matter of saying, you should just be quiet and be happy with what you have because your belly's full, right? That's just going to alienate people. That's not going to get you anywhere. But talking about the importance of food security and how agriculture and the food system is working collectively to make sure that we can all address that issue, that's an important way to connect on values, right? Because everybody is concerned about food insecurity. But if you play the "we're feeding America, so shut up and be happy" card, all you're going to do is alienate people.
So I'm curious where humility fits into this. Specifically from a scientist's point of view, the ability to be humble enough to say that you are less sure about things than you would like to be. That seemed to be a real problem throughout the entire COVID pandemic. Being a lot more careful and a lot more humble about what you know. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So humility is one of those ways to build connection, right? If you are able to say, here's what we know. Thank you. First of all, thank you for raising your concern about X, Y, or Z. You know, I really appreciate that. I know sometimes it's hard to raise those concerns. Here's what we know today. Here's the best information we have available today. Science is always evolving, always evolving. And so we'll continue to learn and study and understand more. So I think it's important to qualify it, right? So, you know, absolutes are kind of gone. So what's the best information we have today that may be important to you and your family? So it's not about putting it in the academic context, it's about how does it relate to you. So we're doing some work with IFT, Internet Food Technology, Institute of Food Technologists, about creating science communication superheroes. Because if someone like me is now as trusted as a scientist, if we create scientists who are someone like me, then all of a sudden we've got the opportunity to have more influence over this conversation, which is crucially important. Because to have the issues around public health or disease or climate, etc., overly influenced by those who have no understanding or effect of the issues is a huge risk to society. It's a huge risk to society. So from my perspective, scientists have an obligation to become better communicators. Other questions?
Oh, I'm going to take one. Yep. I'm going to take one. There we go. You've worked with several groups to work through the process of building trust in their organizations. Talk to us a little bit about listening and teaching people how to truly listen for that Stephen Covey, for understanding so they can consider other perspectives. Obviously, that's some of the work that we try to do with our students here, is to take in lots of perspectives so they can come to some decisions and, you know, question their own values. But just talk to us about the role of listening.
Yeah. Listening gets harder as you move up in a corporation. We talked about this before in the entrepreneurship class, the difference between being decisive and being arrogant. And it's important for leaders to be decisive, because at the end of the day, somebody's got to decide, right? But it's also equally important, if not more important, that others have a voice, even if you disagree with them. And so a lot of the work we do is around what's the strategic outcome of listening, what's the value. So when we work with companies, we always have to make a business case for building trust, always. If there's not a business case that can be made, why should they do it, right? So we've got to make a business case. Organizationally, it's about building that trust that enhances your reputation, encourages others to support a shared vision. I mean, there are a whole lot of outcomes that you can say are absolutely essential. There are times, unfortunately, when people move up in an organization where they confuse decisiveness and arrogance and believe that demonstrating that I'm incredibly decisive is a manifestation of strong leadership, as opposed to understanding that actually listening and inviting the opinions of others is really a manifestation of strong leadership. One thing I'll say about being a student is hopefully you've not had the opportunity yet to become horribly arrogant. So I would encourage you to hang on to that if you can, and be open to so many different ideas. You can disagree with all of them. You can disagree with most of them. You can disagree with some of them. But the value of hearing them and truly listening to them is invaluable, because it will help you sort through what you truly believe and what is of value to you and how you're going to apply that as you continue to go forward. So bring on all the divergent opinions, some of which you may think are sheer, but being able to process why you think they're sheer lunacy is really important. Yeah, we got one over here.
There's some smirks by our students there, so I'm kind of curious what was happening there when they were talking about it. But we got a question here.
How does diversifying how, or like where we get our food from, affect the integrity that we have agriculturally, such as like farmers markets?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, one of the challenges we have today is that the mic's on. Nice to be here. Everybody here? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. One of the challenges we have today is we've been presented many issues as a binary choice. One system is good, the other system is bad. As opposed to being able to look at what is it about each system that can be important and contribute to our overall health and well-being and the kind of food system that we want to have. So Jason Clay from the World Wildlife Fund sits on the board of directors of the Center for Food Integrity. And he talks about the importance of sustainable intensification. That by being able to do more with less, we actually have a more sustainable system that has less impact on the environment. It's also important to continue to have people find ways to grow their own food and to celebrate local food markets. And I don't view those as being antithetical. I view them as being complementary. You can enjoy the farmer's market. I mean, I love to can. We have a garden. My salsa is killer. But at the same time, I appreciate the fact that we have the most affordable food system anywhere on the planet. And I don't view those as being antithetical. Does it mean either one of them is perfect? Absolutely not. My salsa is pretty close. But the industrialized food system, are there things that can be made better? Of course. But that doesn't mean we have to throw it out. Right? How do we think about continuing to calibrate and improve and celebrate the opportunity that comes with whatever food system we think is going to serve us well? So what I find most offensive is when we are only offered a binary option, because I don't think that's realistic, and I don't think it's helpful.
One of the things that we're really fortunate at Monmouth is that we're a strong learning community. So I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm going to make a comment and just thank the farmers that are in the ag industry, to thank them for extending our students' classrooms to your farms, to you for coming into our classes to teach them, because that extends the learning community. So I want to ask you as a final question, what did you learn from us today?
Oh, great question. I learned to appreciate the joy of community and the Monmouth community. From students to faculty to alumni, there's a certain sense of pride and belonging and a sense of community that you don't find in many places. So that was what I found joyful today, was just a sense of community from everyone with whom I encountered. So I'm very grateful for that. And I want to make sure that for those of you who are farmers in the audience, I have so much appreciation and respect for what you do. It's not valued the way it could be. And what I'm trying to share is there are better ways to have it be valued. And it's all based on building trust, not defending who we are.
Well, one of the things before we adjourn and thank you once again, I want to wish the farmers a bountiful harvest as we're coming up on that season. I wish you another good crop of salsa
Thank you.
in your kitchen.
Got it.
And please join me in thanking Charles again.